I have a confession to make. I knew I wanted to have today's guest on the podcast, and I knew what I wanted to talk about. But the Shaping Opinion podcast tends to follow a stated theme for every episode. For instance, the time we talked to John Shanahan in episode 106, we talked to him about his YouTube channel, but the real theme of the episode was the whole concept of what it takes to be an influencer. Or in episode 72, we talked to Dr. Lloyd Corder. We talked to him about motivational thinker Napoleon Hill. But the real focus of that episode was the thriving self-help industry that exists today. So for this episode, I knew that Carol Roth would be a great guest, and she is. But I had difficulty giving this episode a single theme. Carol does a lot of things in different ways, and all of them well. So how does this episode fit into the Shaping Opinion framework? I guess the best way to put it is Carol has mastered the art of telling it like it is. As she says, she provides tough love on business and entrepreneurship. But the truth is, if you saw her on television, read her blogs, watched her presentations, or follow her on social media, she doesn't stop at the water's edge of business and entrepreneurship. Carol has thoughts and opinions that go well beyond that, and that's what makes some of her posts and her content so interesting. But there's something else, a secret ingredient that I think comes as close as we'll get today to giving this episode a singular theme. Carol wields a disarming and blunt sense of humor to make her points as few can do. So today our working theme is this, using humor to make a point. After you listen, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Send an email to tim@shapingopinion.com. If it's easier for you, get in touch on Twitter or Instagram @shapingopinion. If you want, we can give you a shout out. And as always, thank you for being a listener to the Shaping Opinion podcast. You're the reason we do this. This is Shaping Opinion, a production of O'Brien Communications. Carol, when you were in school, did you ever get into trouble for things that you might have said or jokes that you might have made?
Oh my gosh, I got in trouble all the time. I was very naive, and my family had sort of big personalities. My parents were both characters. I always said my mom was Martha Stewart crossed with Cher, and my dad was half gangster, half Jewish grandmother. So I had no shot of being normal. But the one that stood out to me was that we had a very robust library, and I was a pretty advanced reader. So I would read a lot of my parents' books. And my mom had gotten into a series, I don't know if you remember it, but it was back in the 80s called Truly Tasteless Jokes. Mm-hmm. And so I read and became very familiar with all of the Truly Tasteless joke books, which were all very truly tasteless at the time and now would be absolutely horrifying. And I remember at I don't know if it was Hanukkah or it was one of the major religious holidays, and I told a sex joke from the Truly Tasteless joke book when I was probably 10 or 11, had no idea what it meant, and my mom was horrified and informed me I would never be doing that again. So yeah, it was good like that.
Did she ever bring that up after that?
You know, it's funny, they didn't. They didn't. That sort of fell by the wayside, but I remembered thinking it was pretty funny.
I'm Tim O'Brien. In this episode of the Shaping Opinion podcast, we're joined by Carol Roth. She's a 2020 version of a Renaissance woman, a national media personality, a former investment banker, a New York Times bestselling author, and now an investor, business advisor, and entrepreneur. The premise of our podcast is simple. We talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. In this episode, we'll talk with Carol about her career and the niche she has carved out for herself, providing tough love on business and entrepreneurship, among other topics. And in keeping with the theme of the episode, we'll talk with Carol about how she leverages the power of a sense of humor to make a point. Carol Roth describes herself as a recovering investment banker and a billion-dollar deal maker, and that's just the beginning. She's a national media personality, a business advisor, a company director, an investor, a sought-after speaker, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Entrepreneur Equation. She's been the host of Microsoft Office's Small Business Academy, and she makes frequent appearances on Fox Business Network's Bulls and Bears. She's on CNBC and many other network news shows. She has a popular blog, and she's the host of a podcast called The Roth Effect. And of course, she's what you might consider a social media influencer, with a legion of followers on Twitter and a big presence on other platforms. But as I mentioned, if Carol has a superpower, it's probably her ability to drive a point home with a sense of humor that's edgy and contains no small amount of truth.
I subscribe to a couple of philosophies, which blends with the fact that I have the sense of humor of a 12-year-old boy. But I believe that funny is funny. I don't care if it's inappropriate. I don't care if it's not PC. I don't care who says it. I'm somebody who can separate sort of art from artists, and funny always wins. So if it's funny in my book. That being said, that is not always the case. And you have to be very careful as somebody who's delivering humor in terms of whether it's going to work for your audience. So I'm at a point in my life and career where I don't care so much. I kind of do things for my own amusement. We call it comedy for one. If I think it's funny, that's all that matters. And if anyone else thinks it's funny, it's gravy, except for obviously in certain professional settings. But I've definitely, as an MC or live on TV, I've had a few things that were not interpreted appropriately, but I'm in a position where that doesn't matter to me. Whereas, 20 years ago, that could have been something that would have destroyed my career. So I'm a very do as I say, not as I do kind of person. And I think that humor, while it's great, can be very dangerous. And I think particularly in business, humor is often misinterpreted, particularly when written. Not everybody has the same sense of humor. And if people don't know your background, a lot can be read into it. So I think you have to be very, very careful with it. Personally, funny is funny.
Well, one thing I notice about you is that your humor, it's not one-liners. It's not Rodney Dangerfield with a punchline. It's the humor that you seem to be an artist at is brutal honesty. That's the way I would describe it. So how would you describe the way you weave honesty into your humor?
Well, thank you. That's quite a compliment. My husband always said I missed my calling as a stand-up comedian, and I guess that sort of observational humor, trying to find the sort of the ridiculousness and the obvious, a little bit Seinfeld-esque or Larry David-esque. A lot of times I'll come up with something and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, do you remember that Seinfeld?" And I'm like, "No, not exactly," but it makes sense that it would be the same thing. But yeah, I just kind of I'm very good with observational, and I'm also very quick. So if somebody says something that's unintentionally an innuendo or is just, there's sort of like a ridiculousness to it, I'm going to jump on it. One of the most famous back and forths I've ever had on Twitter, and I think that one of the reasons that probably somewhere between 15% and 20% of the people who follow me on Twitter because of is an exchange that I had with Piers Morgan over the Second Amendment. And for many years, I was on his show as a commentator on his political panel, which is funny enough because I actually came to it as a business person, but that's a whole other story. Mm-hmm. But he was going off about the Second Amendment. And regardless of where you stand on the Second Amendment, just appreciate this is not really about the Second Amendment. It's about the humor aspect. So just try and take it out of the political context. So he was lamenting that the Second Amendment was designed with muskets in mind, not high power assault rifles. And then he wrote fact as if he had some sort of time machine that could travel back and he knew exactly what was going on when it was written. And so I tried to just, because, we had a relationship, I tried to say something along the lines of, it was really for people to be able to defend themselves with whatever type of weaponry they might need to be defended from. So very snippily, he said, well, where exactly did it say that in the Constitution? I must have missed it. And in 2 seconds, I said, right next to the word muskets. And that 4-item exchange, this happened in December of 2012, to this day, still makes the rounds virally. And I didn't think anything of it because it's just sort of the stuff that I do all the time. It was just such a stupid comment to me where, he's like making this thing up out of thin air and then saying, where does it say it in the Constitution? It's like, well, you just, ran through this whole exercise. So I just went away and said, oh, that's funny. And I remember calling a friend and laughing about how funny it was, and like went off to a meeting and came back to like 40,000 emails and tweets and kind of this hula ball. And that was before like Twitter was a thing. As I said, it was 2012. If it would have happened today, that probably would have gone on for 2 weeks. It's that kind of stuff that like if somebody's going to serve up something funny, my brain works really quickly and I'm going to sort of hammer you on it right away.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, how fast your brain works. And this is true of anyone that is described as having a quick wit. What does go through your... in fact, it's such a short period of time when you come up with a response like that. It's hard to describe what goes through your mind. But if you could describe what you think goes through your mind in such a short span to come back with something like that.
I just think that like, imagine having a record player where you hit that like speed button and then everything kind of sounds like the Chipmunks. I just feel like that's the speed that my brain is set on at all times. And I didn't ever realize that was the case because it seems very normal to me. But in interacting over many years, I realized that that's sort of the exception and not the rule. And, I just think it's the way that I was wired. I don't have any particular explanation, but everything is on that kind of like, and I also think that it's just sort of my outlook because I do love humor so much. And it's like, honestly, like my favorite thing to do is laugh. There's nothing better in the world to me than to laugh. And so I do try to see the humor in, anything that's not a like direct business situation. Like if I'm, problem solving or, doing something in a crisis, obviously I may not immediately head to that, but in just sort of my way that I view the world day to day, everything else I don't take particularly seriously and just try to find the little pieces of humor in everything.
Well, one thing I do want to do is ask you a little bit more about your background, but you touched on something else that I did want to ask you about here, because that musket comment with Piers Morgan, there's a saying that one way to illustrate how someone else is maybe being absurd in your mind, and this is a rhetoric thing. It's an argument and debate thing. When someone else is being absurd or they have no basis for their position, one way to illustrate that is to be equally or more absurd. Would you say that that's at play when especially when you made that comment with Pierce, and you've probably done it a million times since?
Yeah, to me, it's always, I think that sometimes analogies and examples resonate better with people. I had a tweet this week that, again, I just kind of said on the fly that ended up going crazy and viral. That was a response to Washington Post and an op-ed that they had that was, basically like, wow, like, the coronavirus has really exposed how the economy is not as strong as we thought it was. Thinking to myself, okay, the government literally shut down the businesses, obviously. So I said, I dropped my phone out of a 20-story window and it broke into a million pieces and didn't work anymore. And it really exposed, that my phone wasn't as strong as I thought it was. And again, it was just sort of like my comment of, like you said, like, look how absurd this statement is. Let me use the analogy. I could have said that's absurd and I could have refuted the points intellectually, but by using the equally absurd example, like you teed up the question with, I think that was far more effective and resonated with the way that other people break down information. And I think that's why it was one of those that was shared and continues to be shared quite widely, even though to me, it wasn't as deserving. I've said much funnier things that haven't done a fraction well, but every once in a while you do hit on something that resonates in that, like, oh, okay, I see that parallel and that analogy. And so that works for me.
I did want to ask you now, because you have had an interesting path to where you are today. You mentioned you're at a point in life where you speak your mind freely. You may not have 20 years ago, but you were definitely your own person from the beginning.
Yes.
From what I read, and doing my research on this interview, I noticed that your family background is working class, and I like how you described your father and your mother. But you were able to attend, though, the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. So can you talk a little bit about what that brought to your worldview? You come from a working class Chicago background. You end up at an Ivy League school, and now you're out in the world. How did you combine the two to give yourself an edge?
Yeah, I always say that I feel like I have a working class or blue collar heart and an Ivy League mind. That's kind of the way that I put it all together. My father, who was my hero and my best friend and miss him every day, was just a fabulous guy. As I said, both my parents were hilarious, like ridiculous characters. But he was a union electrician, did not graduate from college, but was very street smart, very financially savvy, taught a lot of really great lessons, certainly by example. Work ethic was unbelievable. He would wake up at 4 something every single morning and go work outside, sometimes in Chicago and below zero weather out on buildings downtown, and worked for 40 plus years and within that realm. And what was amazing about my parents is that they just instilled this great sense of self-esteem in my sister and I, where we just kind of didn't care what other people thought. We didn't have any limitations put on us. We just kind of felt like if you worked hard and you kept your head down, you did what you were supposed to do, like we could do it. And that's an amazing outlook and philosophy. And so I thank my parents, immense gratitude to both of them, both now passed, who gave me that. But, I had this incredible opportunity to go to a school. And I think that having the blue collar background and the fact that I had to struggle through school, I remember eating my $1 box of rice off of the Chinese food cart every day for lunch because it was $1 and there was a lot of rice in that little white box that I could eat. And, and having that background just made me appreciate it and made me have a plan and goals and know that I needed to set myself up and take it seriously and make the right decisions. And so I think that as opposed to other people who may have had it easier or didn't have to worry about the financial situation, that informs the decisions that they made. And the fact that, I paid for the majority of my education myself and had $40,000 of college debt back 20 plus years ago when I graduated, informed my decision making. And I do feel that the struggle is very foundational to success. And if you don't have that hunger and you don't have, kind of that knowledge that anything could be taken away from you at any point in time, if you don't do the right things, I just don't think that you become as successful as you could be. And so, I'm very proud of my background. And I also fundamentally believe there's nothing particularly special about me other than having a plan and a goal and a support network that allowed me to do that. I feel anybody can do that. And so it always makes me very upset when people say that they can't do that. In fact, we had a popular young congresswoman who said that she did not believe in the concept of bootstrapping. And she literally said it was a joke. And my response to that was to ask people to share their stories under the hashtag #IBootstrapped. And the most amazing, inspirational thing I've ever seen on Twitter, thousands of responses with people's stories, different kinds of success, different definitions of success, but all different backgrounds, all different demographics. And, the only thing they had in common was that they believed in the American dream and they made it happen. And so, I'm very much a proponent of that.
I'm sure your parents were proud of you for everything that you did, especially at that young age. And so you graduate from the University of Pennsylvania and you end up an investment banker at a young age doing big deals.
Yes.
What was that like? And I want to make this a two-part question because you spent a certain amount of time as an investment banker And then you decided to leave that, and you call yourself a recovering investment banker. So what was that like when you did it, and why did you leave it?
So the reason I went into investment banking was, given my background and situation, as I said, I feel like that informs your decisions. I had $40,000 in college loans, a father that said that you don't carry debt and that you have to have an ROI on your education. And so I knew I had to pay it down as quickly as possible. So I had to find the highest paying job that was also interesting and gave me the most responsibility. And so at that level, coming out of college, there's typically two choices. One is management consulting, the McKinseys of the world. And I always say that's for people who like to really deep dive into something. If you really, want to know everything about something, you become a consultant. And then there are the people who have ADD and want to work on like 12 deals at one time. And that's me. So you become an investment banker. And, it was a tremendous opportunity. I decided to make a decision that was a little outside of my path. Normally, I would have gone for the most prestigious name, the Goldman Sachs or the Morgan Stanley, but I wanted the meritocracy, and I wanted to work with people where I could have enough rope to hang myself and who were cool and entrepreneurial. And that's why I chose a firm back in the day called Montgomery Securities that was very much like that. And there were a lot of former pro athletes and a lot of just, very cool, driven people that didn't care so much about like, oh, well, you've only done this for X amount of time, so you must be at this level. And that worked really well for me because, I was just like consumed by everything and wanted to know everything. And I'm very naturally curious and I'm very greedy. So I wanted to be on every deal and work 16 to 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and, just kind of be in the flow of it. And I quite enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. But there were two reasons why I decided to ultimately leave investment banking, 2.5 reasons. The first being that we went through some mergers back in the late 90s when the key provisions for Glass-Steagall were repealed and commercial banks could buy investment banks. There was a bunch of M&A. And we were bought first by Nations Bank, and then they merged with Bank of America. So we became Bank of America Securities, and Bank of America is a tremendous organization that I do a lot of work with, but very different culture than the sort of young, boutique, aggressive investment bank that I had joined, and just basically everybody left. So I had to figure out something at that point in time. And then I never really wanted to be the world's best investment banker. I did it, because it was a functional thing to do for money and experience. And so that set me out to be able to explore other things. And then that half piece, which again informs a lot of things, is that I had financial flexibility to do so. I had been an investment banker, and so I set aside a very nice nest egg for myself. And then I married somebody who became an investment banker as well. And he decided to continue on that path for quite some time after I did. So I didn't have the same financial issues that I did earlier in my career to inform my decision making. And I had more flexibility. So now it wasn't, just making the money is kind of the driver. I could afford to be more creative. And then as I've been successful as I've gone along, got me to the point where, like I said, I don't care so much anymore because I'm not worried. Like if somebody wants to pull my paycheck, which by the way has happened before, I don't care. It's not going to change my life at all at this point, which I'm very fortunate and privileged to be in that position. But I put myself in that position, and that gives you the flexibility.
One thing you said a little earlier was how important it was to be hungry. Now, here you are, you have a little bit of a nest egg and you're married to an investment banker. How did you keep the hunger up if money wasn't the motivation?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm naturally curious and I have a lot of things that just naturally interest me. I happen to be a very creative person. I have lots of things that I personally enjoy doing that feed me in a different way. So I have hunger that's not driven financially anymore, but is driven intellectually. And I think that that's really important. And I think just the whole process of lifelong learning and knowledge is incredibly important. And I think that's what keeps you alive. I think when you stop learning and you stop pursuing things and creating and doing these wonderful things, life becomes pretty boring.
Well, you were an investment banker. You're curious. And now you start on the path. You leave investment banking for a multifaceted career as an author and then in the media. How did you know that you were a good fit for the media and that you'd write a book and that the book would be so successful? You probably didn't expect it to be as successful as it was, but how did you know that was your path?
I did not know. The media thing, I've always loved media and television. If I didn't have the financial issue in college, one of the things I probably would have done is gone out to Hollywood and worked for some TV network and probably ran a TV network. But that from a financial standpoint and a path standpoint was not the best option to me at the time, although with learning probably could have been successful at that as well. But people would always say, would have such a great personality on TV. Why aren't you on TV? And I was like, that sounds fun. How do you get on TV? What does that even mean? Where can I be on TV? People who know me well know that my fantasy job is to be a game show host. If I could be Drew Carey right now, I would be. But there wasn't sort of an obvious path to doing that. So I always work backwards and say, or if the goal was to be on TV and to have some sort of show, then I would have to have been on national television. And to be on national television, I probably would have had to have been on local television. That would be on local television. I probably would have had to been in front of a camera. Oh, that's something I can do. And, probably a little over a decade ago when the internet was much more nascent, that's what I did. I had my brother-in-law, I remember, grab this big old camera. We didn't have cameras on our phones and stuff back then. And I started, I said, well, I know business, I know small business. Maybe I'll be like a Susie Orman, but I'll answer small business questions. And so I would go out and find small business owners to ask questions and answer their questions on video and put those out. And then I just followed that, back the other direction. I used that to get radio interviews. And I used the radio interviews to get local TV, and I use local TV to get national TV. And I just kind of worked back up the chain. And again, having the flexibility to be able to do that, because particularly in the early stages, that is an investment you make. It's not like they're paying you to come on the midday news and give 5 financial tips. So I kind of worked that way. And then the same thing with the book, I kind of threw up the book because I was pissed off about something, which was that, small business owners got really crappy advice. And then all of a sudden, as I'm just writing, I've got 80,000 words and went, oh, that could be a book. And then once I knew I was going to do a book, I wanted it to be really successful. So I set some goals in place for that and then worked, really hard to try to achieve that. So a lot of it is about trying to set up the goal, figuring out what that long-term goal is, and then figuring out what those steps are along the way until there's one that you can do, and then kind of hitting one after the other to knock them down. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work, but you have to be willing to keep trying and doing it. And fortunately, back to my parents, I certainly have the belief in myself. So I think I've got the skills and the tools to do it. Again, it's not always going to work for a whole slew of different reasons, but there's no reason if I set out to try and do it that it all should be considered absurd. And again, for anybody else either.
I thought that was interesting what you said about the book and what motivated you to write it, because I'm in the PR business myself, and I do a lot of writing for different publications and places. And I noticed when people say to me, where do you get your topics? And I when you said that, I thought, I would think 50% of the times I write an article, it's because something bothered me. And I'm just getting it off my chest.
It's a good motivator. No is a great motivator. Being angry about something is a great motivator. And there's there's different forms of inspiration. I find in general, even my humor, like we were talking about earlier, I do really well playing off of other people or other things. Something I've seen, something I've heard. I took improv classes with Second City, and that whole like yes and mentality of you've teed something up, where can I take that, works better for me. It's one of the reasons why I like dialogues better than monologuing. There are some people who just go and are really good extemporaneously, just saying things. I like to play off of other people, and I feel like I do my best work, even as an MC or whatnot, when I'm playing off of other people.
Once you wrote that book, that opened a lot of doors for you. What was the difference the book made for you?
So it's funny. I don't really feel like the book opened that many doors. It certainly directly didn't open as many doors as I thought it would have. Indirectly, and you can say this about everything from TV to my internet following or whatnot, is there is this perception of expertise that comes with doing certain things. And even though the reality isn't very different, the perception is different. So that it goes back to do you want to hire the person who wrote the book or the person who read the book? And people always want to hire the person who wrote it, and you can command a higher price because you have. So it was really about the branding and the perception versus a lot of direct doors. And part of it was because of the type of book that I wrote. It wasn't like a strategic, okay, I'm going to write a book that's going to lead to these certain key types of keynotes that were high paid with these brands, because I was just trying to help entrepreneurs and small business owners. And so, that's not a way to do that kind of thing. But, it's just more of a general branding and perception kind of thing.
Well, that's another thing too, because it takes more than a book to become successful. You pretty much said that. But I think a book has to connect on some level. Before you write a book, you almost have to be thinking how this book's going to resonate. So you mentioned that there were some certain issues that were bothering you. So what did you see as the way you were going to use this book to connect with small business and other people?
It was actually a tool for other people to connect with small businesses. A lot of people want to start their quote unquote dream business. They bake some really tasty cupcakes and their cousins thought they were great. And so now they want to empty their 401k and, 6 figures, start a cupcake shop. And that's not the best idea. So this is an opportunity for somebody else who may feel like, gee, I can't really tell the person that, to say, here's a book that you should read before you do that. And so, I partnered with SCORE, which is an offshoot of the SBA, the Senior Corps of Retired Executives. They offer free mentoring to startups and existing businesses. So they widely across the country use it as a resource. I know there are a lot of professors who've used it, and just people in the business community who've used it as a resource. And so for my, anger and problem solving, it's actually helped a bunch of other people have the difficult conversation that they were unwilling to have. And I'm always happy to, play bad cop. So they're the good cop for giving away the book. And I get to, tell the reality check and be the bad cop. But the amount of feedback that I've gotten from people who said, you have saved my life savings. You've saved me 5 or 6 figures. I was delusional. Blah, blah, blah. This was not for me. And thank God I had this. The reward from that is just, absolutely tremendous.
I think you actually have a number of catchphrases and you have a glossary on your website. And I think what you're describing there is when someone has a hobby disguised as a business or career, and you call that a jobby.
A jobby, yes.
And how did you come up with that catchphrase?
It's sort of like everything else. It's just one of those things that fell out of my head, where it was like, you would see all these people who thought that they were creating a business or a job, and it really wasn't. It was a hobby that, like, maybe on a good day made a few dollars. And so, I like words, I like wordplay, I like puns and the like, and putting things together. And so jobby is one of the things that came out of that. Now, I have since found out that it is also slang in the UK for crap. And so I thought that was a funny analogous definition for jobby as well.
So here we are now. You've you've been on television, you've been on local television, you've guested on television shows, you've written a book, and you start to move up the ladder to the point where you're guesting on more prominent cable shows, and you're actually a judge on a show, a Mark Burnett show, that was a lot like Shark Tank. Tell us about that one.
So that show is called America's Greatest Makers, and it was the show that Mark Burnett, if you're not familiar with Mark, you're certainly familiar with his work. He created Survivor and The Voice and The Apprentice and Shark Tank, at least brought Shark Tank to the U.S., a whole host of others. He's a pioneer in the industry and just an incredible storyteller and creative person. And he was doing a tech competition show with Intel that was airing on TBS called America's Greatest Makers. And this is a great story about networking and how things that you can plant seeds for things and then they'll never bloom and then just something all of a sudden works. So I had been trying to do all different kinds of reality shows in the past. I had filmed pilots. I had been casted in all sorts of different areas, and they all just kind of sputtered and nothing really hit. And then, interestingly enough, this Maker show came out, and what happened was that the executive producer that they picked had known me from another one of these projects that kind of sputtered and said, I think Carol Roth would be great. And the head of TBS had worked in development in other places and said, oh, I know Carol. I think she'd be great. And Mark Burnett, who I had talked to about other ideas, said, oh, I know Carol. I think she'd be great. And so I didn't even have to audition for that show because I had done so much groundwork with all these people on these other things that all never worked out and panned out, that when it was the right time and the right fit, that all came together. And I had that credibility with all the different players. And so that one did work out. But, it's just things never happen in the time frame or in the realm or the way that you imagine them, particularly in an arena like TV or Hollywood, where things are really, really crazy. But it's just an interesting way about how all this work that I had done in other places that seemed like failures or things that had failures to start all ended up working out in this particular show. And I was a permanent judge along with a slew of other people and some really great celebrity guest judges like Shaq and Kenny Smith and Mayim Bialik from Big Bang Theory and Mike Rowe and a bunch of other people. So it was really one of my favorite experiences in my career, and hope to do more like that in the future.
Success is a funny thing because when you look ahead and you haven't been successful, you never know sometimes you don't know what you're trying to do. Even if you have a plan, you don't know exactly what you're trying to do, but you're going to do it. Then when you are finally where you wanted to be, you look back and it all makes sense. Everything seems to have fallen into place and it's more neat. And so when I look at you, I think here you are now using all the lessons that you learned growing up, the lessons you learned on campus at Penn, using all the lessons you learned in investment banking and then in life. And here you are sitting on a set, judging other businesses. You're now an investor. You're now a sought-after public speaker. And you're still a guest on other cable shows and places like that. And I wanted to come back to the thing we talked about from the very beginning, because I know this for a fact, actually. When I deal with the media for clients, the media always wants to talk to the clients that I have that are good copy. The people that have a good one-liner, a good statement, maybe they're just good at working with the media. So I have to know, I would bet 100% that when you made any of these guest appearances or when you were on certain programs, the producers of those shows had to look and say, let's bring her back because she's witty, she's smart, those types of things. What role do you think humor played in keeping your foot in the door once you got there?
Well, I think particularly in the realm that I do commentary, which is often business, markets, politics, and current events, that it's often absent. So having somebody who's willing to play that class clown kind of role, I'm here for the comic relief, works sometimes if they're looking for that. Sometimes the topics are serious and it's like, maybe that's not the right fit. But, put a panel show together and certainly you're going to want somebody who has that tone to be able to break up the monotony. So, and I think it's authentic to my personality. There are people who try to do it and it just doesn't work.
That's true. So many people try to do humor. I don't want to talk about myself, but I write speeches for CEOs. And one of the things that I've learned from one of my clients, he was the CEO of Heinz, Tony O'Reilly. And one of my coworkers wrote all of Tony's speeches. And Tony always started a speech out with a joke. I watched how audiences relaxed as soon as Tony delivered that first joke. So I adopted that myself. I started to write, when I would write a speech, I always try to open it, not necessarily with a laugh out loud joke, just something to loosen the audience up and let them know that the CEO is human.
Yeah, and to know, and for them to know what's expected. I mean, I do the same thing in my public speaking. I usually poll the audience about, something. And then one of the questions, particularly in the early in the morning, that I like to ask is, how many of you have no idea where you are right now? And, that always gets a laugh out of people, but it says something about me as a speaker, that this is going to be informative, but I'm not taking it too seriously. But that's the presentation I'm giving. If you have somebody who's delivering very serious information or, is somebody who's just more serious in nature, doing that is going to be really weird and is going to set the wrong tone. So I think more than the humor is that it has to be authentic to your personality, and you need to lead with something that sets that right tone.
That is so true. It's not good enough to try to be funny. The most important thing is that that whatever humor you has supports the actual point you're trying to make. And to your other point, if the person is, let's just say, somebody who doesn't have a natural sense of humor, you don't try to inject that in that person. You just you use what you have and make it, like you said, make it as authentic as possible and work with it.
Are you a South Park fan?
Yes.
All right. So do you remember the Funny Bot episode? I am Funnybot. It's where they basically, the Germans decided that they wanted to be funny and they created this robot, and then the robot would make these ridiculous jokes that weren't funny, and then it would kill everybody. And that's just kind of what I think of as you're trying to shoehorn funny into somebody who's not funny. And so either you are or you aren't. As I said, I'm just an overgrown 12-year-old boy. I have no shame and I don't care that much about the repercussions. So I can get away with things. I mean, that's the other thing you have to be careful with too, particularly improv, if you decide to go off the cuff, because I've done this definitely on live TV in ways that didn't come out quite right, is that especially today with cancel culture, this could be very damaging. So if you are a CEO or, in a position of authority or just don't want to get fired from your job, you kind of need to script that beforehand and know how you're delivering it, because if you go rogue and you go improv, it could really not work out for you.
Well, that actually brings me back to something then that you said before, because I did want to talk about Twitter. And I think this is just an opinion of mine. I follow you on Twitter. And I find myself, anytime I see something that you posted pop up, I sort of look at it. I don't just scan past it. What did Carol say now? I look at your Twitter feed. But before I get into some of that, I did want to point out, because we pin things on our Twitter accounts, and we do it for a reason. It's something that we want every visitor to our account see. So in 2015, you tweeted something, and now it's pinned to your account. And it's success comes when you pursue something each day with the vigor to get it done immediately and still having the patience when it takes much longer. So I wanted to ask you about that before asking you about some of the other Twitter things.
That means it's very important. It's an important outlook for other people, and it's an important reminder to myself, because I'm highly impatient. Back to that, turning up the record and everything moving so quickly, as I move much more quickly than everything around me. And so, it really is that you have to just attack everything as if like it's critical and you're trying so hard to get it done, with having that floor and that understanding that the world may not be caught up to where you are, and it may take longer, and it may come together in a different way than you appreciate. So yeah, I put that as my pin tweet because I think it's motivational to people. And I also think it's what I want to stand for. And my Twitter account is pretty varied. I talk a lot about capitalism. I talk some about politics. I share some videos of animals. I, make fun of people, only if I'm punching up, not punching down, usually of their ideas, not of the people. And, of all the things that I could say and stand for, I just like when you first come at the core of who I am is I want you to be successful, whatever that definition is. And it doesn't have to be financially successful, but just like whatever it is that you're working towards, I just feel like that's always a good reminder to come back to. And so that's why I chose to pivot.
Well, that's a key point you made when you said punching up and not punching down. I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make, and especially as they become public figures, is when someone trolls them even on Twitter, they take the bait and they punch down, and that's usually a mistake, and it comes back. But you don't do that.
Most of the time, Tim, but every once in a while, because I do just have that enjoyment of just, like if that softball's just sitting right in front of my face, every once in a while, I'm like, it's just too good, and I just can't help myself. And it's a choice. It's a choice. And I'm usually doing it not to poke fun at that person, but just because it's emblematic of something else that I want to say. And they've given me that platform to build on. Like I talked about that I do well with that. And so I ignore a whole lot of people. But every once in a while, I'm just like, it's so, and you'll get the people be like, well, the guy doesn't have a lot of followers. Like, why do you care? And I was like, I actually don't care what he said. It just gave me the opportunity to make a funny comment or to make a point or to do something, or it was just too delicious. And so I am not above that. I'm a human being. And every once in a while, because Twitter, again, as I always said, is for my enjoyment. If anybody else likes it, that's gravy, but it's really just for my own amusement, that every once in a while, I just have to not be the better person and do it. So,
well, I found myself on Twitter more since the quarantine started, and I'm still busy with work and with clients, but I still find myself visiting that, I guess, when I would be doing other things. I did want to make note of a couple of your tweets that I thought for this conversation were pretty interesting. And on March 27th, we're now in the quarantine, and we're in the middle of the COVID outbreak. And you tweeted something, and I did want to ask you about it because I thought it was just a perfect example of using a little bit of humor to make a point. And your tweet was, "Dear advertisers that keep sending me pictures of fabulous cocktail dresses, how about some cute sweats? Read the room." And that last part is what cracked me up because, here we are on Twitter, and it is basically a room. But what was your point there? I think it was pretty clear, but I'd like to ask you to explain that.
So this is like a perfect example of my observational humor. As I'm like trapped in my house and literally haven't left in weeks. And I'm a shopper. I love to shop and I love a good deal. And my advertisers and I are very close. And so they know my taste and they serve me up lots of fabulosity and I support the economy. And that's just our relationship. And so, they're serving me these like amazing dresses. And I'm like, I don't know that I'm ever going to wear a dress again. And I already have a closet full of stuff that has the tags on it. Right now, I'm wearing a whole lot of sweats. So it would be much more helpful if you really knew me to do some cute sweats. So, that's a perfect example of like, hey guys, read the room. Like we're all trapped inside our houses. Maybe don't put out the cocktail dresses. And yeah, so that's, that's the perfect thing where just something I saw and I just like threw it out there.
One of the things that I notice on Twitter, especially during the pandemic, and I think it's starting to lighten up now, but when the pandemic first got serious, you would open up Twitter or even LinkedIn or Instagram even, and some of these other places, and there was this constant spread of fear and panic. And you were, in my mind, one of the early ones that started to basically remind people we need to lighten up. But then you said something again that there is this common thread with you, and it is about tough love for business or just business sense. And there was another tweet that you said that I liked, and I'm also a sucker for American ingenuity and American innovation. So this tweet really resonated with me. First off, the California governor, Gavin Newsom, he tweeted out this. He said that LA received 170 broken ventilators from the national stockpile. Rather than complaining, we put them on a truck, drove them up overnight, and had Bloom Energy get to work fixing them. Monday, they'll be back in LA fixed. That's the spirit of California. So he was promoting California, and it was a good tweet, a good story. But you retweeted it with this comment. You said, business, and you used the sign, business greater than government, part 3,224,475. In other words, business is always going to outperform government. So you are true to your mission there. When you even with a comment like that, you're true to your mission that business has a purpose, and American ingenuity and American innovation is always going to win out, especially over government. That's really a common thread for you, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm a free market capitalist, and my interest in politics, which happened, very much accidentally, really, like, I feel like my place is just, continuing to remind people that in the spirit of Milton Friedman, rest in peace, like, there are no angels who are going to organize society for you. And even if they could, they're not going to be as effective or efficient as the free market. So it's just so funny how you have these people oh, well, the government didn't do this, government didn't do this. And then it's like business stepping up, and it's like, yeah, this shouldn't be a surprise. It's like the 3 millionth example of this. The government, they got the stockpile, the government stockpile of ventilators, and they were broken. And so they had to get a business to step in and fix them for it. That seems pretty obvious, but yeah, pointing these things out and making the points with humor. And in an analogy, again, it goes back to some of the other highlights we talked about before. I just feel like that resonates with people. And, with some people anyway. not everybody's common sense, and not everybody gets the humor. And then that's the other challenge that I have, since we've been talking so much about humor, is because I do say some things that are serious and some things that aren't. Most things that aren't, but some things that are serious, that sometimes people kind of conflate the two. And so you'll get people who respond to jokes with serious comments, and that drives me crazy. It's like, no, I wasn't actually serious, or I generally meant it tongue in cheek, and this is supposed to be kind of a funny thing. You're not supposed to give me a solution that wasn't really a problem. Just making a joke. Everybody needs to calm down. If you follow me for long enough and you have any sense of my personality or sense of humor, because one of the things I am is highly consistent, I think it becomes clear. But as we've learned, not everybody is clever. So that's my albatross to bear.
I think more people are starting to inject humor. It's sometimes a dark humor, because it's usually when you're in a tough time and you're starting to let off some steam, the humor can be a little dark, but it's funny, it's edgy, and more people are doing it, and you're certainly doing it. So I did want to ask you now, looking ahead, on the issue of the quarantine and business, we're not 100% sure exactly when it's going to end. What do you think small businesses will need to do to rebound from this?
Yeah, this could be we could do an hour on this. I'm not sure that the quarantine ends in a month. I think maybe it morphs in a month, because there's only so much time I think some people are going to be able to stand in place. And if we had better testing and information, we could do a better job of letting the people who aren't a threat out into society, and only holding back the people who are in a threat. But there are all sorts of issues with us and just the way that we go about our lives, and when people behave in human nature, that may or may not make that come to fruition. I think that in the at least medium term, this is going to affect the way people transact. I think people are going to be more scared to be in the same places as other people. I think they're going to spend less time out, in restaurants doing some of the things that they did previously. So I think if you are a small business that depends on people being in your location, you need to really adapt and pivot and rethink your business model. If people's behavior continues on this trajectory, even if it's 50% better or 60% better, it's not going to get to 100% probably for some time, or at least hedge in case it doesn't. What do you do then? And how do you rethink your business model? And small business owners and entrepreneurs are resilient. So I think that they should be thinking about that. I think they should be looking into all different kinds of grants and financial assistance. Hello Alice has, if you go to my Twitter stream, I tweeted about it, a center where they're giving $10,000 grants to certain small businesses. Other small businesses I've seen have sent out and started relief funds for their employees. So talk to your consumers, your customers, people want to support. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Go to your vendors, go to everybody that you work with and see if you can get discounts or better terms. I think people are really willing to be helpful. But as we come out of this, you need to be really thinking about your business model. You need to be thinking about health precautions because, again, we're probably not going to have a vaccine until year end at the earliest. So even if people are out and about, what are you going to do to keep your employees and customers safe? And I know that most of us aren't health and safety experts, but guess what? That's just one more thing that small business owners need to get up to speed on. And just, how you're going to reset your business model. And then just in general, having some sort of a rainy day fund. Obviously this was that black swan event that came out of nowhere. And, it's not going to be the last time that something like that happens. So it's not always a trajectory where, hey, we kind of see it coming and the recession's coming and you can kind of plan for it. Sometimes these things just come out of nowhere. And I always think that preparation is key. If you fail to prepare to fail.
Thank you, Carol. Where can people find you?
My pleasure. I appreciate the time, Tim. I appreciate the thoughtful questions. I would invite your listeners, if they enjoy my sense of humor, to follow me on Twitter at Carol J.S. Roth. And if they do not enjoy my sense of humor, do not follow me on Twitter because it's definitely not for the faint of heart. And if it's the kind of thing where you're going to get, upset or mad about things, I am not the person you should follow, and I'm totally okay with that. If you want more information on me from a business standpoint, I have a website at carolroth.com. The book we referenced was The Entrepreneur Equation. I have another product that we didn't talk about called Future File at futurefile.com, which is really relevant in the days we're living in now because it's a kit that helps you to prepare your information and wishes for illness, emergencies, and death. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are just completely unprepared with that kind of info, from what medicines you're taking to where are the accounts to passwords to all that kind of stuff. So for under $100, we help you get that organized. So check that out. And I'm usually on your TV on Fox Business and have columns at foxnews.com and foxbusiness.com. But from a TV standpoint, one of my shows is on hiatus because it's a panel show and the schedules are all kind of messed up. So if you follow me on Twitter, I usually post about it. And if not, I'll see you back on the TV once all this gets sorted out.
So again, Carol, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Tim.
To learn more about Carol Roth and everything that we talked about today, see our show notes at shapingopinion.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please help others find it. Leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. On Twitter, just tweet to us at Shaping Opinion, or you can get in touch with us through our website, shapingopinion.com. We have a Facebook page, and we're on Instagram at Shaping Opinion. Shaping Opinion is a production of O'Brien Communications. This is where we talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Until next time, I'm Tim O'Brien.